Good evening and thanks for watching. I'm Katie Moore. We begin with some breaking news tonight on the Will Smith shooting trial. The jury is now deliberating in the case against Cardell Hayes. He's the man accused of fatally shooting the former Saints star. The jury got the case at about 4:53 this afternoon after 6 days of testimony and a long day of closing arguments. We begin our coverage tonight with Paul Murphy live at criminal court. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Katie. The jury has now been deliberating for about 40 minutes. Earlier today, the jury listened to 5 hours of closing arguments with both sides accusing each other of peddling lies during 5 days of testimony. Rachel Wolf now has a wrap-up of what the prosecution and defense told the jury.
The courtroom was packed as both sides presented their closing arguments in the Will Smith shooting trial. The prosecution went on for about an hour, while the defense went on for several hours. Assistant District Attorney Jason Napoli began his closing arguments this morning, saying this case isn't even close. He presented it as a loving father who was executed over a petty argument. He says Cardell Hayes intended to ram the back of Smith's vehicle after the initial fender bender on Magazine, and said Hayes' own best friend admitted there was no physical contact between Smith and Hayes once the two got out of their vehicles. Napoli recalled testimony from a neighbor who says he saw Smith walking away and Cardell Hayes fire the first shot, then walk up and pump 7 more shots into Smith's back. He told the jury, quote, Hayes had no problem looking at you all and Raquel in the eye and lying about everything, end quote. The defense would have you believe Will Smith shot his own wife, and that's desperation at its finest. Napoli said there's zero evidence that Will Smith ever got to or fired a gun. Napoli ended with, quote, Will Smith played defense for this city. He was defenseless that night. Now it's time for us to play defense for him, end quote. Using no notes and pacing the courtroom, defense attorney John Fuller painted a different picture, one where his client was at a disadvantage from the start. At times yelling in the courtroom, he dissected the state's case and the work of NOPD homicide detectives. He said Mr. Smith isn't with us because of the way he acted that night, and indicated Smith and his passengers as the aggressors, that Smith threw a cup of alcohol in Hayes' face, then swung at him several times before telling him he was going to get his gun. Fuller said, quote, things were happening so fast, as every witness testified, so fast that split-second decisions had to be made, end quote. Hayes said he did not shoot Raquel Smith. Fuller stressed in 8 months there has been no DNA test on a single projectile. Fuller said what happened doesn't take away from Will Smith's legacy on and off the field. But now, quote, it ain't about being starstruck, it's about justice, end quote. In the end, the jury must decide if Will Smith was the aggressor and Cardell Hayes was acting in self-defense, or, like what the prosecution said, that Hayes was a cold-blooded killer who unloaded 7 bullets in Will Smith's back, taking a man's life over a car accident. Rachel Wolf, Eyewitness News.
And on rebuttal just a little while ago, Assistant District Attorney Laura Rodrigue told the jury to remember 2 things that could take Hayes' claim of self-defense out of play. 1, that Hayes rammed his Hummer into Smith's Mercedes, and 2, that he got out of the vehicle with a gun. Now let's take one more look at the charges. The jury is now considering guilt or innocence on 3 separate counts against Cardell Hayes. First, second-degree murder. If convicted, Hayes would face a mandatory sentence of life in prison. The jury could also opt for the responsive verdict of manslaughter. If convicted, Hayes could then face 20 to 40 years in prison. Hayes is also charged with the attempted second-degree murder of Smith's wife, Raquel. On that charge, he faces 10 to 50 years. And the jury is also considering aggravated criminal damage to property. Hayes could face up to 15 years on that charge. And we will continue to follow the deliberations throughout the evening, and we'll bring you additional details if they become available. We're live outside Orleans Parish Court. Paul Murphy, Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Paul. Great coverage throughout this trial. And joining us now with his perspective on today's turns in court, WWL-TV legal analyst Chick Foray. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So 3 hours, 22 minutes for John Fuller today in his closing arguments. Why go that long, especially when we're hearing that some of the jurors may have even been falling asleep during it?
It was too long. It definitely was too long. I think the reason why he did that is to identify with any particular juror. You don't know what they're thinking about. Maybe this point is important. Maybe this point is important. So he went through every point. It was like a cafeteria style. You can have some of this. You can have some of this. Pick whatever you like. I'm going to give you every possible theory there is. The problem is that in a closing argument, you summarize the case and you explain to the jury the main points. I thought he did a really good job because I know all about the case. I've been studying it. I thought Laura Rodriguez did an incredible job because she simplified it for them and she made it very clear that the self-defense issue does not fly if you listen to the coroner's forensic evidence, Dr. Huber. Dr. Huber places Raquel here and Will here facing each other with the Hummer here. If they're facing each other, we know that Raquel is shot in the right leg, which goes through to her left leg. We know that Will is initially shot in the left side. He swivels this way, and then he's shot with a C pattern in his back. That theory fits perfectly with the state's theory that the incident was diffused, that they were heading back, and that Will Smith did not go for his gun until Raquel got shot, Will got shot, Will swivels for the gun, and then he gets shot in the back. Cardell Hayes has a number of problems. The first problem he's got bad facts. You got 8 shots in the back, 1 on the side, 7 on the back to Will Smith. Second problem he's got is he's got a bad demographic jury. He's got 1 black man on his jury. And the third thing he's got is he has a sequestered jury. It's Sunday night. They got the case just a short while ago. They're going to look to be going home. I would not be surprised at a quick verdict. If Cardell Hayes gets a manslaughter, it's a victory for him, but I wouldn't be surprised with a second-degree murder, guilty as charged.
Now let's go back to Ms. Rodriguez's closing real quick and those facts about what the coroner had to say. Did they show evidence, or is there any way for them to show evidence of when those shots came into Will Smith's body?
Well, if you look at the way they're facing, it makes sense. Raquel, Will. I mean, to me, it was pretty clear. The jury's not going to find. Mr. Fuller had pointed out to the jury and given them perhaps wet their whistle a little bit with, well, maybe Will Smith had a gun. The jury's not going to find that Will Smith fired a gun, I should say. Will Smith had a gun. He had it next to the driver's seat and the console. He had it buried there. They went to the French Quarter Fest. He knew he couldn't get in the French Quarter Fest with his weapon. He brought it back to the car. He put it there. The issue for Cardell Hayes is, did Will Smith say, you want to see how you use a gun? I'm going to get my gun. Did he say that? Or was the incident diffused? He and Raquel retreat to the car. They get shot. He reaches for the gun. I thought Laura Cannizzaro tied that up just like you're supposed to do in a rebuttal argument. And I really think that the jury's going to be looking to go home. They're going to be looking to get this over with.
Was that the first time that we heard her admit that Will went for the gun at all?
Well, we knew about the French Quarter Fest. There really wasn't a lot of talk about there was a lot of talk from Fuller and Cardell Hayes that Will Smith was going to get the gun.
But from her, is that the first time that we heard from prosecutors saying Will Smith got shot once, then he was leaning toward going to get the gun?
I don't remember hers or any witness specifically saying that Will Smith was going to get a gun, but it was obvious because we had talked about the French Quarter Fest. The gun was buried next to the console, so yes. But I'm going to tell you, if anybody had any questions as to how it physically could have happened, she tied it all together.
All right. Thank you, Chick Foray. You're going to be with us throughout the night. Hopefully, we're going to get a verdict tonight.
Like election coverage, we'll be here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chick, so much. Our reporters in the courtroom are continuing to post live updates on any new developments. You should follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and on our WWL-TV mobile app for news about the deliberations and, of course, about a verdict. We will also break into programming for live coverage whenever a verdict is reached. Well, after a cold weekend, the roller coaster of a forecast is on its way up again this week, and temps aren't dropping nearly as much tonight as they have previously. Chief Meteorologist Carl Arredondo is in the Forecast Center with a first look at the forecast.
Hey, Katie, yeah, I'm not a big fan of roller coasters, and if you take a look at this graphic, we'll show you that we are definitely in the middle of this roller coaster. Go back to last Tuesday in the mid-60s. You see temperature falling to its coldest day on Friday at 51. Today, we're at 69 for a high temperature at the airport, and tomorrow we'll be in the mid-70s, so that roller coaster is on its way up. As you look at your temperatures right now north of the lake and into Mississippi, upper 50s along the Mississippi Gulf Coast with lower 60s in many areas of the North Shore. South of the lake, temperatures are in the 60s right now, 58 at Boothville. As you can see, 64 around Houma. As we go through the next couple of hours, temperatures will be falling into the 50s most areas. But then overnight tomorrow morning, we'll have to watch the possibility of some fog developing. That may be the biggest concern for your morning commute tomorrow. As you see, temperatures will be pretty much in the low to mid 60s for morning lows, so not nearly as cold as what we've been the past 2 or 3 mornings. And there's also a very small chance of rain for the morning commute. Coming up in my pinpoint forecast, we'll talk about what could be a rainy start to the work week.
All right, we look forward to it, Carl. Thank you. Still ahead on Eyewitness News, a violent night in New Orleans with half a dozen shootings. Hear why our crime analyst says it puts the city on an unfortunate track. Plus, the Coast Guard spent...
Sink or tub stopped up? Can't get it to drain? You know who can?
Ruderman can. Ruderman can. Ruderman can. 262-8222. 262-8222.
Surprise! I'm back. You said